This video has been sponsored by the Magic Candle Company. Visit the link in the description down below and use offer code OFFHAND at checkout to save 15% off of your entire order. You see, it's kind of like how the parks also do sponsorships for the rides. It's like a tie-in thing. The early days of Disneyland and Walt Disney World were magical times, full of attractions that moved us, people, from place to place. Guests were, and are, still able to walk through the screen into their favorite Disney films like Peter Pan, Snow White, and Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, where you go to hell and you die. That's not in the movie. Why is it in the ride? Many have fond memories of their childhood riding now closed attractions like Horizons at Epcot or the Mine Train through Nature's Wonderland at Disneyland. These famous attractions are the brainchild of one organization, Walt Disney Imagineering, which in turn stem from the creative life and imagination of the founder Walt Disney himself. Walt was famous for his can-do attitude, his larger-than-life persona, and his blue sky thinking. Walt was also notorious for how much money he invested back into the parks, or I guess, in his case, the park. Disneyland. That's all there was. Everyone knows that Walt Disney was really rich, and Disney paid for all of the attractions at Disneyland themselves. Right? Wrong! You goobers. No, Disneyland was still very much being planned out, imagined, and yes, even paid for while it was being built in 1954 all the way through to 1955. It was very much a fly by the seat of our pants kind of moment for Walt Disney Imagineering, back then known as WED. And you have to realize that Walt and all of the Imagineers, the company as a whole, were really only funding this Disneyland park with money that they had made from their movies and cartoons in the past. Not a whole lot when it comes to building a physical theme park. Once you start building rides, those costs really start to add up, especially if you want to make it different from all the others. Cleaner, music everywhere, trash cans every, 30 feet? Sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. I haven't actually measured that yet. So what do? You want to build this entertainment enterprise where parents and children can have fun together and experience the worlds of your movies and be transported into the past and the future, but you don't have the money to do it. Well, you get other people to pay for it. You take out loans and you do sponsorships. Sponsorships are what essentially built Disneyland as we know it today. And we still see some remnants of these sponsorships, not just at Disneyland, but throughout all Disney parks, everywhere, all around the world. So today we will be taking a trip through the wonderful world of sponsorships and exploring how synergy can be good for both one company and another company, and I guess also maybe sometimes the guest. From its humble early days as Disney's chosen way to fund their dream attractions and new productions, to sort of what it has become today, a way for you to be your own boss. All you have to do is sign up your friends and your family members and your grandma and your mom and your niece, and even if she's like 3 years old, doesn't matter, she can still sell Scentsy. It's Dumbo themed, okay? You can smell an elephant. It smells like popcorn, I think. Everybody join me, settle down on the couch, pop yourself a bowl of, I guess, elephant-scented popcorn, but most importantly, sit back and relax as we take a journey into the wonderful world of sponsorships.
Well, it came about when my daughters were very young, and Saturday was always Daddy's Day with the two daughters. So we'd start out and try to go someplace with, different things, and I take them to the merry-go-round, and I took them different places. And as I'd sit there while they rode the merry-go-round, did all these things, sit on a bench, eating peanuts, I felt that there should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where that the parents and the children could have fun together. So that's how Disneyland started. Well, it took many years. It was a period of maybe 15 years developing I started with many ideas, threw them away, started all over again, and eventually it evolved into what you see today as Disneyland. But it all started from a daddy with two daughters wondering where he could take them, where he could have a little fun with them too.
It was the 1940s when Walt Disney began to sort of flirt with the idea of building a physical space where guests would be able to pay a nominal fee, walk through the gates, and experience a world of Disney magic beyond the studios. The idea of this Mickey Mouse park wasn't quite the same size as the Disneyland park that we ended up with. But even as Walt was pitching the idea for Mickey Mouse Park, which sat across Riverside Drive from the Walt Disney Studios, because various bankers, investors, and even employees at the studio were vocally opposed to it. Roy Disney is even quoted as saying that a fanciful, expensive amusement park would lead to financial ruin. The funds simply weren't there, even after the success of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. There just wasn't enough money to build Mickey Mouse Park, much less an entire Disneyland. So the idea was put on the back burner for the better part of 15 years. But Walt wouldn't be dissuaded. If he couldn't allocate money from the studios to Disneyland, he would allocate his own money to Disneyland. Walt sold vacation property and borrowed on his life insurance to help fund construction, and formed a secret covert task force of his most trusted employees at the studio to help him plan out, imagine, and sketch out this new Disney land. Meanwhile, Roy, financial ruin, Disney decided to start shopping the project to different television companies to help secure funding. The world of television programming was a rapidly expanding one, and one that Walt and Roy wanted into. They wanted a little piece of that TV pie. After being rejected by both NBC and CBS, Roy scheduled a meeting with ABC, a network that was desperate for quality programming and just anything to help fill those airwaves. Meanwhile, back at the studio in the secret WED building, Walt had tracked down Herb Ryman to help him draw a detailed rendering of what Disneyland would look like. Over the weekend, Herb drew this famous piece of Disneyland concept art, and the following week, Roy decided to take the drawing into ABC, and ABC was convinced. I mean, come on, look at this. This looks amazing. And so it was that the very first ever Disney Parks sponsorship went into effect. ABC agreed to loan Disney $500,000 and guarantee $4.5 million in loans in return for a 1/3 ownership of Disneyland, and also in return for a show that would air once weekly named after the park, of course titled Disneyland.
This is the Walt Disney Studio in Burbank, California. And directly over Mickey Avenue, the main thoroughfare of the studio. To all outward appearance, it's just another working day here. But the truth of the matter is, something unusual is going on in the studio today, something that never happened before. Here now to tell you about it is Walt Disney.
Welcome. I guess you all know this little fella here. It's an old partnership. Mickey and I started out the first time many, many years ago. Now we want you to share with us our latest and greatest dream. That's it, right here. Disneyland, seen from about 2,000 feet in the air and 10 months away. I want to tell you about it because later on in the show, you'll find that Disneyland the place and Disneyland the TV show are all part of the same.
So with a majority of the funding for Disneyland in place, with the help of ABC, construction began on Disneyland in July of 1954. But just because construction was underway and ABC had agreed to lend Disney some money, that didn't mean the sponsorships had to end there. No, my friends, actually the sponsorships continued. And they continued a lot. I even made a list here of some. This is not an all-inclusive list of sponsors on opening day of Disneyland, but here we go. Richfield sponsored the Autopia, Bank of America literally had a bank on Main Street, USA. Carnation obviously sponsored the Carnation Cafe. Coke for the Coke Corner. TWA sponsored Flight to the Moon. Kodak was there. Fritos sponsored Casa de Fritos, which is now Rancho del Zocalo. Monsanto with the Hall of Chemistry. Pendleton sponsored clothes and woolen mills in Frontierland. Pepsi served drinks there. Not as cool as Coke, though. Aunt Jemima sponsored the Pancake House. Santa Fe sponsored the Disneyland Railroad. Swift sponsored the Market House. Timex had a Main Street clock. Upjohn sponsored the pharmacy at Disneyland. There was a pharmacy. What's Upjohn? I don't know. Chicken of the Sea famously sponsored the Pirate Ship. Western Printing, Hollywood Maxwell obviously sponsored the Wizard of Braz, one of the most infamous shops ever at Disneyland. Town Square Realty had a shop on Main Street, USA. Kaiser Aluminum with the Hall of Fame. Everyone loves the Kaiser Aluminum Hall of Fame. Ruggles China and Glass had a shop on Main Street, USA. Grandma's Baby Shop had a shop on Main Street, USA. Sunnyview Farms had a shop on Main Street, USA. Maxwell House Coffee had a coffee house on Main Street, USA. And Puffin Bakery had a store, you guessed it, on Main Street, USA. If you were paying attention to that final part there, you may have noticed that a lot of companies had their very own shops set up on Main Street, USA. It was more so of a shopping location than it kind of is today. On Main Street nowadays, you can find a lot of Disney branded merchandise, but on opening day in 1955, you could find almost about everything, including, yes, Wizards of Braz. Sponsored buildings and restaurants in Disneyland sort of winded down in the following years, but sponsored attractions remained a mainstay. United Airlines sponsored Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room, I guess to encourage people to fly to somewhere in Polynesia to look for tropical birds. Bank of America, who I previously mentioned earlier had just a bank on Main Street, USA, sponsored It's a Small World when it made its transition from the New York World's Fair to Disneyland in 1966. And it was in 1967 when it was decided that Tomorrowland was very quickly becoming Yesterdayland instead of a shining vision of the future. So it's then when we received the very first ever incarnation of a new Tomorrowland, the very first one. The theme for this new take on the land was called A World on the Move and featured brand new attractions like the Carousel of Progress, also from the World's Fair, sponsored, just like at the fair, by General Electric, Adventure Through Inner Space, sponsored by Monsanto, and the Tomorrowland People Mover, sponsored by Goodyear. That's right, the tires that made the best attraction at Disneyland that no longer exists move were Goodyear tires. Even though the People Mover was a shining vision into the future, how people could get around from place to place without having to get in a car or on a bus or even in a bike, you were being advertised to the entire time. And I would gladly be advertised to by Goodyear if they just, brought it back. Just bring back the People Mover. So all you have to do is just bring back the People Mover. But all the while during the development of this new Tomorrowland and moving World's Fair attractions from New York to California, there was something else going on behind the scenes over at WED, something that was dubbed the Florida Project, a project that had begun before Walt Disney's death in 1966, but had quickly after his death transformed into something new. From a progress city to an experimental prototype community of tomorrow to an entire Disney World, the project was now being spearheaded by the very same man who told Walt Disney all those years ago that a theme park would be a waste of resources and time. Roy Disney was the driving force behind what would open on October 1st, 1971, the Magic Kingdom, as part of Walt Disney World.
Walt Disney World is a tribute to the philosophy and the life of Walter Elias Disney, and to the talents, the dedication, and the loyalty of the entire Disney organization that made Walt Disney's dream come true. May Walt Disney World bring joy and inspiration and new knowledge to all who come to this happy place. A magic kingdom where the young at heart of all ages can laugh and play and learn together. Dedicated this 25th day of October, 1971.
Now, Disney as a company was in a much more stable place financially when the Magic Kingdom and Walt Disney World opened in 1971 than they were in 1954, so they didn't have to have as many sponsors as Disneyland did on their opening day. But that didn't stop them. Because the Magic Kingdom was meant to be a sort of Disneyland East, many of the attractions from the original were replicated at the Magic Kingdom, including the Enchanted Tiki Room. Oddly not called the Enchanted Tiki Room and not sponsored by United Airlines in Orlando. Instead, the attraction was called the Tropical Serenade, and it was sponsored by the Florida Citrus Growers. And that whole arrangement Disney had with the Florida citrus growers led to the whole Sunshine Pavilion and the Orange Bird character, who we can still see sort of from time to time in the parks today. He's been sort of hiding recently. But as always, the granddaddy of sponsored lands had to be Tomorrowland. Tomorrowland at the Magic Kingdom had just about as many sponsors as its sister land over in Anaheim. Of course, since the Walt Disney World People Mover wouldn't open until 1975, but also wouldn't feature tires, Goodyear did not sponsor the attraction. They instead sponsored what is now known as the Tomorrowland Speedway, back then called the Grand Prix Raceway. The following year, the Omnimover Dark Ride If You Had Wings would open, sponsored by Eastern Airlines, the official airline of Walt Disney World. Allegedly. They don't exist anymore. If You Had Wings became Delta Dreamflight in 1989, sponsored by the still existing airline Delta. The Country Bear Jamboree was sponsored by Pepsi Cola and Frito-Lay, which were the same company. They merged in 1965. I mean, who wouldn't want to sponsor the Country Bear Jamboree? I mean, you'd have to be out of your mind to refuse that. Now, the Magic Kingdom very much echoed Disneyland's sponsorship system. They would have companies sponsor attractions, pay for their construction and upkeep, while allowing them to advertise to the guests on board the attraction, but more overtly advertise to them at the end of the attraction. But little did anyone know that deep in the bowels of Walt Disney Imagineering, in the recesses of a dimly lit room that you could hear like the stalactites dripping water into pools of bigger water, Imagineers were formulating something completely new, something that had never been attempted by Disney ever. A theme park that wasn't basically just Disneyland. A brand new theme park that would take the ideals that Walt Disney had imbued into the Florida project and his experimental prototype Community of Tomorrow, and make it a bit simpler, yes, but also incorporate them into something resembling a permanent World's Fair. And that project seemingly would revamp the entire way Disney thought about sponsorships, not just for attractions, but for entire countries, from entire countries.
Today, they are imagineering the future. And with the help of their sketches, renderings, models, and a little imagination on our part, we can turn the clock ahead to October 1st, 1982, for a preview look at Walt Disney's greatest dream. Epcot Center, a fast new showplace for the innovations of tomorrow and the nations of today. This unique community of ideas will encompass two major themes. First, Future World, posing the challenges and previewing choices for the community of tomorrow. And second, the World Showcase, a community of nations focusing on the cultures, traditions, tourism, and accomplishments of people around the world.
Now, extremely simplified, the idea for the original Epcot Center was essentially a super Tomorrowland with the World Showcase on the back, showcasing, obviously, different countries and cultures from all over the world. So not only would you have brand new cutting-edge technology in the front of the park, you would also have pavilions that were hopefully sponsored by their home countries in the back of the park. And for that, you bet your bottom dollar, Disney would need a lot of sponsorships.
Just beyond Future World, nestled on the banks of a broad lagoon, is the World Showcase, the first permanent international exposition of its kind. Here nations stand side by side in friendship along the banks of a broad lagoon. As you stroll along the promenade that circles the lagoon, you'll discover exciting shows, attractions, restaurants, shops, and great architectural landmarks unique to each nation.
You see, during the original conception phase of Epcot, the idea was to have each country sponsor their own pavilion within the World Showcase. That way Disney didn't have to pay for it, for one, obviously. But also, too, Disney advertised it as a way for countries to advertise to visitors, to get them to visit their home country and to spread their messages and their technology and their culture to people who otherwise never would have visited the country or never would be able to. Disney said in a 1975 annual report that the World Showcase would, quote, offer participating countries a permanent installation for such features as themed restaurants and shops, product exhibits, industrial displays, cultural presentations, a trade center, and even special facilities for business meetings. Major sponsorships for each participating nation will be asked to provide the capital to cover the cost of designing, developing, and constructing its attraction and/or ride and all exhibits, as well as the pavilion itself. Its land lease will cover the cost of maintaining the attraction for a minimum of 10 years. Problem was, though, on opening day in October of 1982, none of the pavilions in the World Showcase were sponsored by their home country. The only pavilion that ended up getting sponsored by its respective country was Morocco, and that didn't even open up with the rest of the park. That pavilion ended up opening 2 years later in 1984. And Morocco would continue to sponsor it all the way up until 2020 when the sponsorship was dropped. That's why the fountain in the middle is far, 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 far worse than it was. Meanwhile, up at the front of the park in Future World, sponsorships continued as normal, albeit with a little bit of a more heavy-handed approach, especially when it came to rides like Universe of Energy or World of Motion, where the main focus of the attraction was to sort of inform you about what products you could buy to make your life better from Exxon or GM respectively. And as time has moved forward into the present day, Epcot, while not having nearly as many sponsored attractions as it did in its opening years, is still sort of looked back upon as the sponsor park. Everything was sponsored back then, everything had a message, everything had an ad. It was the advertisement park, but it was done in a way that was sort of tasteful. I don't know how to explain it. Old Epcot was really creative with its product placements, and up until recently, Chiquita was the sponsor of the best attraction on property, so that has to count for something. As the years passed, more theme parks opened and more sponsored attractions opened alongside them, with more popular brands sponsoring them. Who really knows what Exxon does? I know they do like oil stuff with oil, but I know about McDonald's. They got burgers and fries. Let them sponsor a dinosaur ride. But when MGM Studios opened in May of 1989, the park was not sponsored by MGM. Instead, Disney had just entered into a licensing agreement with MGM in order to feature a wider variety of films and intellectual properties other than just Disney and, say, Touchstone. However, flagship attractions like the Great Movie Ride did have a sponsor almost its entire run. And other attractions and pavilions switched out sponsors on numerous occasions, like the Land Pavilion at Epcot was originally sponsored by Nestle, then Kraft, and then I suppose at one point it became sponsored by Soarin'. However, you may have noticed that in recent years, not many attractions or lands have been opening with sponsorships. The only exception I can think of in my head, right now off the top of it, is Tron Light Cycle Run, which is sponsored by Enterprise Rent-A-Car. That's why they have the whole Team Green thing as you're on your way out of the attraction with the green light cycle. It's not featured in the ride or in the queue, but you do see it on your way out of the attraction. So I guess they do get their little ad spot in there at the end, which remind me for later. But attractions in places like Millennium Falcon or Rise of the Resistance or Seven Dwarfs Mine Train, even Tiana's Bayou Adventure, these rides are not opening with sponsors, not at all. Even Avengers Campus over at Disney California Adventure, none of those rides had sponsors or have sponsors. So it seems that Disney is sort of moving away from the sponsorship idea, moving to just sort of fund these attractions themselves. Now, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Because one could argue that if Disney gets a company to sponsor the construction and the theming and the upkeep of an attraction, most of the time they turn out better. Now, this isn't always the case. Test Track 2.0 was sponsored by Chevrolet, and a lot of people consider that inferior to Test Track 1.0. Here's hoping that 3.0 will be better than 2, because it's still sponsored. Disney is not paying for the retheme. That's why it's happening right now at the tail end of the whole Epcot refresh. Disney is not really paying for any of this. Which raises the question to me, is Disney moving away from the sponsorship model a good idea? Can we blame sort of lackluster attractions in recent years on the lack of sponsorship money, since Disney has to put up all of the money for maintenance, upkeep, construction, and theming all on their own? Or does just the sheer existence of Test Track 2.0 throw that theory out the window? I don't know. I genuinely have no idea if things like Avengers Campus could have been improved by being sponsored. And that's coming from someone who loves web slingers. It's far superior to Toy Story Mania in every way. But then every now and then you'll have a company come in to sponsor an attraction that wasn't sponsored before, just because I guess they enjoy the vibes. And this is the case of Dumbo the Flying Elephant at the Magic Kingdom. You see, in 2023, Dumbo got sponsored by an American pyramid, a multi-level marketing company, Scentsy. Now, Scentsy is a company that sells things like wax warmers, body products, and candles. Now, not the Disney Park scented candles. We're gonna get to that in a second. How MLMs work is, instead of selling their objects through retail or online like Amazon or Target, they'll instead sell their products through individual consultants who receive a little bit of kickback money whenever they sell a product or recruit a new consultant, which is why sometimes you may receive, an email from that person in high school that you haven't talked to for the better part of 10 years asking you if you'd be interested in buying a vacuum. Now, this isn't me saying all MLMs are scams. I mean, I could be saying that, but I'm not going to say that here in this video. Sometimes they can sell genuinely high quality products, and it's not like this is the most unethical sponsor Disney has ever brought on board. I mean, come on. Nestle used to sponsor the land, and Exxon used to sponsor Universe of Energy. Exxon! This Exxon! This Exxon! The very same. Sensi is very tame compared to these. Plus, I mean, with the addition of the Sensi sponsorship, we got the Smellephants on parade, a sort of scavenger hunt of food-scented elephants scattered throughout Storybook Circus. It's kind of fun walking up to them and seeing if you could catch just the faint whiff of chocolate or popcorn. So as we wrap this video up, my friends, I have to ask you now, what does the future hold for sponsored attractions at the Disney parks? As I mentioned earlier, they seem to be moving away from it, and I think there's a reason for that. Attractions that aren't necessarily based on an IP are easier to sponsor. Attractions like Universe of Energy, Test Track, Living with the Land, those are easier to find a sponsor because you can just slap the sponsor name on the sign, change a few little signs and themes in the actual attraction itself, but when you have an attraction or a land that's based around one IP, which is what Disney is leaning more and more towards these days, you can't have a company like, I don't know, Burger King sponsor a Moana log flume attraction, or maybe Amazon sponsoring a Spider-Man themed roller coaster. It just doesn't make logistical sense. And then who's in charge of signing off on that sponsor? Is it Amazon? Is it Disney? Is it Marvel? I don't know. I mean, it's a very complicated situation, but when you have an attraction that's not based on an IP, it's easier to move these companies in and out as sponsorships change and switch out throughout the years. So I think that's the reason why we don't really see as many sponsors with Disney attractions now. But I mean, that really also doesn't explain away Tron and Dumbo. Those are both IP, but I guess it's not as in your face as other sponsored attractions are, if that makes sense. So I believe as long as Disney continues to move down the route that they're going now, of opening lands dedicated to singular IPs and attractions dedicated to IPs, that we won't see too many sponsors moving into these lands and rides. That isn't to say, however, that rides without IPs will get a sponsor. I think Spaceship Earth will probably remain sponsorless, even though it's had a sponsor for most of its history. Chevrolet and Test Track, I think, will continue to stay hand in hand, arm in arm there for a while. And I think if Disney were to do what a lot of people are actually asking for, and that's build a ride without any existing IP, an original attraction, if that were to happen, I think the only way it would be with a sponsor. That way, if it fails, like Disney is afraid that it will, Disney aren't the ones paying for it, and they can come back in 2-3 years and say, dang, Krispy Kreme Donuts Adventure Through Inner Space 2 isn't quite working out. Maybe we need to do something else with the ride, and then the Krispy Kreme will put up the money for them to retheme it again until they have a success on their hands. But until that day arrives, my friends, we can continue to enjoy our currently sponsored rides and wonder what the future holds for rides without a sponsor that really should have a sponsor. I mean, what's Spaceship Earth doing? There's literally a place on the sign for a sponsor name. That ride really needs one. It feels wrong without a sponsor. And so too does this video. So everyone, if you'll indulge me for a second, instead of going back to the early days of Disneyland or the early days of Epcot Center, let's go back to the early days of Offhand Disney, back then known as Offhand Disneyland, and talk about the sponsorship system that was in place back then.
Greetings to everybody. Greetings to you watching at home. We are here to witness the very first episode of Offhand Disneyland. A man who will soon one day be known as the People Mover guy, but until then, we'll be talking about the Skyway at Disneyland. Yes, all of this will soon be home to People Mover and Living with the Land and Haunted Mansion facts, but for now, in order to fund this video that will take 11 months to build and will not be up to safety codes at all at the time of opening, we must cut to a commercial break. Here at home, we are safe not only from ethyl gasoline and the war, but also from crowds at the parks. However, some of us may want our abodes to smell like the very parks we are trying to avoid at this moment in time right now, which, in that case, Magic Candle Company may be able to offer a solution. Not an NLM or any sort of pyramid scheme, Magic Candle Company offers the offer code OFFHAND at checkout to save 15% off of your entire purchase of soaps, candles, wax melts, and wax melters. Far better than smelly, the Magic Candle Company can accomplish all of your wildest dreams as long as they pertain to smelling the Disney parks from your very own home in an instant, allowing for 3 to 5 business days to ship, of course. With scents like Banshee's Flight or Pirate's Life, you can recreate the scent of your favorite attractions from your home, office, or fallout shelter. Once again, the offer code is OFFHAND at checkout to save 15% off of your entire order, and make sure to light the Haunted and Pirate's Life candle at the same time to recreate the smell of Jean Lafitte. Or so I'm told here on this piece of paper that was just handed to me by a pirate-looking guy. And now back to the Abandoned Skyway video, the very first ever Offhand Disney video. Wait a second, I'm confused. Is this supposed to be the end card for the video? Is the video over already? Why am I still talking like this? Why are we still doing this bit? Anyway, hello everyone, every viewer out there at home, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit the like button, and if you're new around here,
please be sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you know when a video goes public. Oh, I guess it's fixed itself. A very big thank you, of course, to all of my supporters over at patreon.com/offhanddisney. They help keep this channel going. They help it so I can make these videos and bring these videos to you. If you want early access to some videos and even some exclusive access to Patreon exclusive videos, I will have the link down in the description there for you. Even just $1 a month will get you access to those perks. You also get your name in the credits at the end of every single month at the end of the last video. So if that sounds like it'd be fun for you, that's gonna actually happen next week, so make sure to get those dollars in. Literally just $1. However, if you'd like to follow me for free without spending any money, you can also do that. I am at Offhand Disney on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Just makes it a bit easier for you to find me. But that is all of the business I have at the end of this video for the end card, everybody. Thank you again all so much for watching. I sure hope you enjoyed this video going into the past of Disney sponsorships and the potential future, what we may end up seeing for sponsorships as time goes by. I'm really curious to hear what you think will happen if Disney does end up building another original attraction without an IP. Would that have to be sponsored? I think my opinion is that it would. Let me know down in the comments below, and I will see you all of you lovely people, in the video next week. Goodbye.